Hello, my name is Matthew Tave, and this is my presentation for the research project for the software engineering class in fall of 2022. My infographic is about test-driven development, which is a software development process that is reliant at its core on software testing and relies on software tests that accurately represent the requirements for a software product. So I started with a problem formulation and kind of an overview of test-driven development, which is, as I said, a software development process that is deeply reliant on software testing. The core idea behind test-driven development is for the creators of a product to turn the actual requirements of a software product that they want to develop into software tests. Then, if a software product that they create passes these tests, we'll be able to ascertain that it has in fact met the requirements for that software product. It's covered in chapter 9 of our textbook. Test-driven development is important because while it's existed for several decades, it's recently gained more interest as it's one of the core extreme programming practices, along with agile development and many other practices that are in common use at companies today. During my literature search, I found that test-driven development focuses on short and targeted development cycles to add new features quickly. In addition, surveys have shown that many developers are more engaged when working in a test-driven development environment, specifically because of these short and targeted development cycles. It's easier to stay focused if you're focusing on one small achievable feature, and it leads to increases in developer productivity and other positive characteristics. Case studies have shown that test-driven development results in higher error catching rates and an increase on focus and quality, because if you're constantly writing accurate tests, then you're more likely to catch relevant errors. It also results in a focus and quality because of those aforementioned short and targeted development cycles. If performed properly, it'll result in a software product that meets the strict requirements that were set out in the beginning to a high standard. And in general, most literature supports test-driven development. When working in a test-driven development environment, there are several steps that teams must take. First, they need to decide on a feature to implement, and then they need to write the requirements for that feature in a clear, itemized way that is easy to test. Ideally, those requirements should be written like as close, not in pseudocode, but in a way that's very easy to convert in pseudocode and is very logically structured. Then you write software test cases that represent the requirements very accurately. And then you write functional code that passes the test cases. In many cases, some teams do it so that they write code that just barely passes the test cases, and it's kind of the bare minimum. Because once you have the bare minimum for the code, you can then go refine it, optimize it, improve documentation, make it more readable, make it faster. And when every small change you make, you can make sure that after that change, it still passes a test case. So you haven't broken anything. And you're never going to put in too much time to a feature when you broke something a long time ago, because you can always run those test cases that you wrote at the beginning of the project. While test-driven development can be more work in the beginning because you have to front load the test cases and you don't get any functionality out of writing those test cases in the beginning, you can see in this graph, which isn't based on hard data, but is a more kind of general representation of test-driven development, that eventually you have less technical debt and it's easier to work on new features because you have a very solid background for the project because everything is thoroughly tested. So like I said, well, it's more work in the beginning as you have to write those tests that don't provide any actual functionality. Eventually, the cost of change kind of levels out. Whereas if you were working without that and just kind of trying to write functional code, worry about tests later, you'd get more and more technical debt. Overall, I found test-driven development a really interesting new perspective on software development. And it's really interesting how before writing any actual code for the project, you write tests first, because that's kind of very backwards to traditional software development. I also found it really impressive how much research there is to support test-driven development. And overall, I think it's a great software development process. Thank you for listening to my presentation.